On today's hot sheet, I'm discussing Fannie Mae's home purchase sentiment index, unemployment data, plus I'll be answering your questions live. Today is Friday, December 8th, 2023. I am Byron Lazine, and the hot sheet starts now. Welcome to this free format Friday edition of the hot sheet. You can put your questions into the live chat and I will answer them throughout the show, as many of them as we possibly can, from any topics we've covered throughout the week or what is happening today. I'll touch on the topics that I think are most important here in the last 4 hours, as we always do. And if you'd like to call in, you're more than welcome. The number is 203-548-0417, and it is scrolling down below. Love to see where you are tuning in from in the live chat. All right, before we get into the Fannie Mae home purchase sentiment and the employment data that just came out, was released this morning, I do want to touch on one of yesterday's topics. If you were with us on the hot sheet, then you know the topic I'm talking about, the new legislation proposing a ban on hedge funds from owning single family rental properties. So using single family homes, owning them for rental purposes as an investment. A proposed ban from Democrats in both the House and the Senate. We covered this on yesterday, and I've realized that this is a huge topic for many. Many people are supportive of this proposal. I know this to be true because I put out a tweet on X yesterday, and it just went absolutely bonkers. I think it's up to 145,000 there it is, 145,000 views, and it's continuing to go up. Just posting what we talked about yesterday, the new legislation that Congress introduced to prohibit hedge funds from buying and owning single family homes in the US. Now, yesterday, if you remember, we talked about the 10-year period in which they would have to get out of owning these homes. Okay. And what was unclear yesterday, because I didn't go through the entire 14-page proposed bill, was how those penalties will work. Well, we put together a piece on nowbam.com that you can find. New legislation proposed banning hedge funds from owning single family home properties is the title. And within this piece, we have a table to illustrate the 10-year phase out plan, which would end with a complete prohibition on corporate purchases and ownership of single family homes. It's not just hedge funds. It's the definition of institutional buyer, essentially, would not be able to, if you're, syndicating to go and buy single family rental homes, any of those types of investors would not be able to do it. So let's go through the table here, because I think it's really interesting. In the case of the first full taxable year beginning after the applicable date, so there on the left side, you see first year, second year, third year, fourth year. So the maximum permissible units for a hedge fund taxpayer is 90% of the number of applicable single family residences owned by the taxpayer on the applicable date. So you would have to, in year one, get rid of 10% at a minimum, or you would see this penalty. The maximum permissible units for any other applicable taxpayer is 50 plus 90% of the number of applicable single family residences owned by the taxpayer on the applicable date. And then it continues to go essentially down by 10% each year until the 10th year. So according to the bill, those who fail to report the required information or fail to report accurate information shall pay a penalty of $20,000. Wait a minute, $20,000. Does that hurt a hedge fund that owns a couple thousand rentals and is making tons of money? So I don't know that the $20,000 would do anything, but there is additional penalties here. Okay, so here's actually an additional piece of legislation. Corporate owners of more than 75 single family homes pay an annual fee of $10,000 per home. Okay, so that starts that up. And that would go towards down payment assistance of families. So that's the American Neighborhoods Protection Act. that we went through yesterday. So I did think it was important to bring that to your attention because we discussed it yesterday in the hot sheet. You can go back and look at re-listen to yesterday's hot sheet if you want the full breakdown on that, or you can just go to nowbam.com and get the article. All right. Let's get into the Fannie Mae uh, home purchase sentiment. Take a look at that. Of course, I've got my show notes in front of me here, which I'm going to go through, and we're going to be adding every single uh, show's show notes to BAMX starting on Monday. So if you haven't gotten a BAMX yet, use code HOT to get 10% off. You'll be able to take these show notes and use them towards your local show. We do about 3 or 4 segments every single day, and all the work has been done on all of these topics. Okay, Fannie Mae home purchase sentiment decreased in November by 0.6 points, maintaining a low-level plateau established in the first half of 23. Only 14% of consumers believe it's a good time to buy a home, marking a new low in the survey. Respondents expect both home prices and mortgage rates to increase over the next 12 months. So more of this, we've seen a lot of these surveys the last couple of weeks. Some, some seem to be different than others. Despite the monthly decrease, the full index is up 7 points compared to the previous year. HPSI plateaued due to the persistent consumer pessimism about the housing market influenced by high income prices and mortgage rates. Consumers expect a reduced sense of financial security with fewer reporting household income growth over the year. That's probably true, okay? That consumers, and certainly when we're seeing inflation, we're seeing that what we're seeing with inflation, we're seeing that the lower income level uh, earner is getting squeezed the most. But we're going to talk about employment data here in a second. And what I'm seeing heading into 2024 seems to be a reinvestment from a business standpoint. Even the ones that laid off, they might have strategically laid off in quarter one or quarter two of 23, and now are strategically reinvesting in their business. There was a sense in the beginning of 23, in the end, really Q3, Q4, maybe even more so, of 22, that businesses had to pull back, cut expenses, make some tough decisions, save money. And I'm not saying businesses aren't being smart with their money now. I think they certainly are across the board, generally speaking. But I'm seeing businesses invest in their operations, invest in their strategies right now, going into 24. What would seem like a higher level than quarter four of 22, and the employment data shows that. It shows, and so we'll get into that in just a second. But it shows a stronger economy than what was maybe once thought earlier in the year. Certainly when we were dealing with bank crisis. Again, I've said this before. I think we can have a real shot at a pretty good year in 24 economy wise. Um, Despite some of those shallow recession predictions, what changes that is if they don't come up with a fix for the commercial, office building crisis that, on the refinances. If they can't come up with deals, banks and operators of these businesses, of these buildings, to refinance the properties, then you might have a crisis there, which could impact regional banks. So outside of that blowing up, I can't make that prediction that it will blow up. I think there's good chance that it could, but outside of that happening, I think that there's not many signs that would suggest some type of recession next year. Economy continues to be strong on all reports. So getting back into the HPSI from Fannie Mae, we do have a little bit more information here. We do have some charts, which we'll put down into BAMX, of course. You can see the sentiment well below where we were at in 2019, which look at that, the sentiment in 2021, 22, um, never touched the level that we had in 18 or 19. 2019 was a really like normal, I'd go as far as saying fairly healthy real estate market, and the sentiment here certainly reflects that data when you look back, not even in 21 or 22 was it at those levels. All right, let's get into the employment data because I think it's quite interesting. Non-farm payroll employment increased by 199,000 in November, and the unemployment rate edged down to 3.7%. So we had an increase of 199 and then downward on the unemployment rate to 3.7%. This is just reported here this morning. And we were seeing unemployment tick up a little bit, which was something that the Fed would, was responding to in the sense of like, hey, we're not going to do anything now. That was a good thing for the Fed, but now we're seeing the economy continues to maybe even strengthen. Okay, when you have unemployment edging down, there was projections that it could get up over 4 when it hit 3.9. We're now down to 3.7 again. So really low levels of unemployment. Healthcare added 77,000 jobs in November, exceeding the average monthly gain of the prior 12 months. Government employment increased by 49,000 with gains in local and state government. You continue to see government jobs gaining every time we read one of these reports in pretty significant numbers. They're always in like the top 3 spots. Retail trade employment declined by 38,000 in November. Manufacturing saw an increase due to the return of workers, but that was expected back from strike. Unemployment rates for various demographic groups show little or no change in November. Teenagers' unemployment rate edged down to 11.4%. Way to go, teenagers. Way to get back in the game. Number of long-term unemployed, 27 weeks or more, edged down to 1.2 million, consist 18.3% of all unemployed persons would be that category there. So economy is stronger than expected. These numbers that came in, the 199,000 in November added on the payroll was better than the 190,000 Dow Jones had estimated, well ahead of October's gain of 150,000. And average hourly earnings, a key inflation indicator, increased by 0.4% for the month and 4%, 0.4% for the month and 4% from a year ago. But that was close to expectation, so nothing to be worried about there. Although you do see the 10-year here this morning ticking back up over 4.2. Of course, we've been feeling really good about the 10-year here this week in the 4.1 range. Maybe with this strong economic data that we have today would be the reason for the tick up on the 10-year. Hopefully it won't change all the ground we've made here on the 30-year fixed. This week, we have a 7.05 reading. Yesterday, we've been, if you just look at the whole week, it's been in that low 7 handle area for the 30-year fixed. And it's just like we're getting so close to getting a 6 handle. The 30-year fixed weekly came in 7.03. So beautiful numbers on the 30-year fixed. I'm sure there are lenders in your local area and for individuals that can qualify and have a particular type of credit and all those variables that are getting a 6 something mortgage rate this week. So good news for buyers. Haley, any questions that we want to jump into from today? So Jeff says, with employment data not good for interest rates, what are the odds of a Fed hike in December? And secondly, what is the impact? Will this impact possible Fed cuts in 2024 and middle 2024? Jeff, there's no indication, even this morning, it hasn't been changed. Investors are, over 90% confident that next week, I think it's next week, right? Yeah. Is the 14th and 15th next week? Yeah. That next week, the Fed will not increase the federal interest rate. So That's what they're pricing in. They've been pretty, as they're basically placing a bet. That's, it's kind of like Vegas odds when the investor community makes their bet on what's going to happen. They've been very accurate in the last few for sure. So that's been unchanged. As for mid 2024 on cutting rates, earliest projection I've seen is May. We've seen Powell take a hard stance and not give any indication that there's a cut on the table coming. Nick T from Wall Street Journal, his earliest projection has been a possibility earliest in May. He again, I consider him like the Adam Schefter of the Fed. He gets leaked information when the Fed wants it out there. He's the guy that they go to. But he hasn't, made any stern projection on when that might happen. I think ultimately we have to see what happens in quarter one. We look back on quarter one of this year. We had the regional banking crisis. Something like that pops back up after the holidays, then a whole new ball game. But if we consistently just keep, moving forward as we have been here the last, second half of this year, I think there could be cuts in the middle of the year next year, as early as if. Here's the other thing: if the Fed would start looking at inflation the way, a more updated version of CPI data and inflation data, and pull out owner's equivalent rent, which is a made up number, we'd already be damn near the 2% target. So, if they can open up and see, and maybe that this 1 year now of this rental data decelerating all the way down to flat, or even in some cases negative, maybe this lagging data finally gets into inflation reports in quarter one. And, as we get closer to 2, what Jerome Powell has said is as we get closer to the target of 2%, they will start cutting before we get there. So we need inflation to keep going down, obviously. Haley, any other questions we got? We're good? All right. We're going to jump out here on this week's hot sheet. Remember, if you want to get access to all of our show notes that we use on the hot sheet, here's the example of today's, then jump into BAMX. We're going to be loading them into BAMX every day starting Monday. You'll be able to take these show notes and use them for your local email newsletter, your social content, your show. We do about 15 to 25 given the week segments every single week. The exact data that our senior editor here at BAM is putting together for these shows will be available for you starting Monday. If you're not in BAMX yet, use code HOT to get 10% off of that. Hope everybody has a great weekend. Later today, 2:00, a new Knowledge Brokers podcast will be out over on the @Knowledge Brokers podcast channel. Hope you check that out, and hope you're already subscribed to this channel as well. Thank you. Have a great weekend. Till next time, toodaloo.